Makers. This is part 2 of the Taste the Rainbow challenge. So in part 1, I showed you what I did to make all those natural dyes and what fruits and veggies I used for each color. And in this video, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with those dyes. So I'm going to dye some cake batter, I'm going to dye some buttercream, and some ganache as well. So all of this is brand new to me, so you're going to learn right along with me on how everything's going to react in each different medium. So I need to line my cake pans with parchment. So how I do that is I put my cake pan down on my parchment, not upside down, right side up, because this edge is going to be a little bit fatter here. So just like that, and I want to put it right towards the edge so I can hopefully fit as many as I can in one sheet. And then I'm just going to trace it like that. And I have 6 cakes today. So I'm going to see, probably only get 4 on this one. But I don't want to be wasteful, so I want to get as many as I can. So yeah, I'm going to get 4, so I'll need another sheet for the other 2. Oops, didn't quite get that line. Try that again. There we go. And then I'm going to cut this out. Now the cake pan that I just drew, the circle is out here. This is slightly smaller, so I'm going to cut just inside of this circle, and that's going to give me the slightly smaller circle that I need. And it's going to cut off that pencil line, which I don't want. Nobody wants to eat pencil. So I'm just going to cut just inside of that line, all the way around. And just as like an extra precaution, I always put mine in upside down, just in case I didn't cut any of the pencil off, but you should. So turn it upside down as long as it fits nice and flat. That's all we need. So I'm going to do that for all 6 of my pans. In my mixer, I have my butter, and I'm going to go ahead and add my sugar. And this cake is traditional creaming method. So we're going to cream this until it is nice and light and fluffy, and very, very important that everything in your recipe is at room temperature. So my butter has been sitting out for a while, my eggs and my milk have been sitting out until they're all nice and room temperature. So we're gonna go ahead and get this creaming. Our butter and sugar are all nice and light and fluffy. And I scraped the bowl a couple of times in that process just to make sure it all is nice and even. It's even more important with a really big batch slice like we're doing right now, because it's very difficult to scrape as we go the more we go, so just be extra careful. So now I'm going to start gradually adding my eggs. I have 10 eggs, so a lot of times we do small batches, and gradually adding eggs means 1 at a time. But when you have a lot of eggs, that's not what that means. So I have 10 eggs, so I'm going to add 3 at a time. Go ahead. 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to combine this until it's all emulsified. Then we'll add the next step. First addition of eggs all incorporated, so I'm going to add another 3 eggs. And I scraped the bowl before I started adding these eggs. Always want to make sure you're scraping the bowl. All right, in goes in my last addition of eggs, and I'm going to go ahead and add all 4 in. And I'm going to add my vanilla as well. I'm going to mix that all together. Oh, my eggs, my vanilla have been added. So I'm going to do another scrape before I start with my next addition. Okay, so in this bowl I have my dry ingredients, and over here I have my milk. So my dry ingredients are my all-purpose flour, my baking powder, and my salt. So I'm going to combine these together first so I can make sure both are you know, really mixed in well. So there's such small amounts, you wouldn't want a lot of baking powder in one section of your cake and not the other. So you definitely want to mix that. And we're gonna alternate whenever we're doing the creamy method and we're alternating with wet and dry, we're gonna start and end with flour. So I'll add 1/3 of my flour, half of my wet, 1/3 of my flour, half of my wet, and then 1/3 of the flour. And as soon as we start adding this flour, we do have to worry about gluten development. So each addition is gonna happen just before it's mixed all the way through. And you can see my mixer bowl is already pretty full. I'm definitely pushing the level that this machine can handle. So that means I have to do just a really, really even more extra great job of scraping my bowl. So I'm gonna go ahead and add 1/3 of my flour. It doesn't have to be exact. And because it's so full, I'm gonna pulse it so hopefully flour doesn't go everywhere. A little poofs out, no worries. So I'm gonna mix it till it's just about mixed. So you can see there's definitely some dry pockets. It's definitely not quite mixed. I'm gonna scrape my bowl really well. And my paddle, don't forget to scrape your paddle. I'll tell you what, it's much harder to do around a tripod. It's a new skill I'm gonna be able to put on my resume. Can bake around camera tripod. Or maybe not yet. Maybe by the end of this I could say it. It's definitely still learning that piece. All right, so now I can add half of my liquid. And again, this should be room temperature. And I'm gonna pulse it so it doesn't splash everywhere. There we go. All right, just about mixed. I'm actually gonna take it off and I'm gonna fold it in. Not fold, but I'm gonna scrape it off the mixer just because it's getting so full. It's getting kind of hard to mix while it's on the mixer, so it's gonna make my life a little bit easier. Make sure you get the bottom too. I'll probably take it off after the next milk addition as well. And I'm seeing my batter is definitely extra yellow again because I'm using my brother's farm fresh eggs. So hopefully that doesn't create too much of a problem when I go to color my batter. Hopefully it doesn't read too yellow. All right. Get this. I'm gonna go wash my hands and then I'm gonna do the next addition. All right, so it's time to add some more of my dry ingredients, which is another 1/3 of my total flour, which would be half of what's remaining. It looks like about half. Ooh, and I am definitely pushing the limits of this mixer. Look how full it is, guys. All right, so I'm gonna pulse it. Let it mix till it's almost mixed. All right, so that's about almost, whoa, don't do that, Chef. Then I'm gonna add the remainder of my milk. Don't think I could make much of a bigger batch, huh? So I'm gonna pulse it again. Mix it till it's just about mixed. Now I'm gonna take it off and I'm gonna scrape it off the mixer again. All right, it is time for the last addition of flour. Right up to the tippy top of this mixer. Whew. If I can get it so no flour comes out of this bowl, that's gonna be just a baking miracle. All right, let's see if we can get it to not make too much of a mess. Couple pulses. Okay, it's doing all right. So we're gonna let this mix until it's all completely combined, and then I'm gonna do a little bit of folding just to make sure it's combined all the way through. So it just came off the mixer, and you can see there's still some flour that didn't quite incorporate, and that's just because it's a little bit over full. It was kind of above the paddle. So that definitely means that I need to get in there and do some hand mixing. Really, you shouldn't push this amount. Really should have been in a bigger mixer or in 2 batches, but I don't have a big mixer, and I guess I'm not very patient, and I don't want to do 2 batches today, so I definitely pushed my boundaries, which means I'll have to do some hand mixing, which is okay. Industry trick to clean this off is actually to use nice clean hands. You don't have to wear gloves because it is not ready to eat food, but you can get a lot more batter off if you use your hands versus a spatula. And I'm not going to try to get that flour off. Then I'm just going to get in there, get it all nice and folded together. Make sure I go to the bottom as well. It's all nice and mixed together beautifully. So I finished folding all the batter together so it's nice and even, and then I split it evenly amongst 6 bowls since I have 6 colors to use today, and I've set them up like a rainbow because I'm OCD like that. So all I have to do is add food coloring and mix them together. So you want to be careful, and this is a new style of coloring to me, so I'm not really sure how much I need. You also don't add too much liquid. Some of these are, like this one's pretty liquidy versus this one, which is not super liquidy. You don't want to add too much liquid. So I'm gonna start with just one, and I'm hoping to also have some left over to help color my buttercream. So all I'm gonna do is add and fold them together and see what colors that I get. And it's important to note that these are natural colors, so this is beet and this is our red. So no, it's not gonna be a perfect bright red, but it's gonna be pretty close, probably more in that like pink spectrum like you're seeing. And that's okay. And I might actually have to use all of it to get the color that I want, and then have to make a little bit more for my buttercream, which is all right. All about trying new things. You do wanna kind of pay attention to how much you're folding it, because the more you fold it, the more likely you are to get tunneling. It is a little bit easier with this kind of method to get some tunneling just because you're mixing a little bit extra than you would if this was just a regular batter. So I'm gonna go through this with all of my batters until I'm happy with the colors that I get, and I'm gonna kind of see how the colors all look together and see if it's gonna give me the look that I want. So I'm not thrilled with the orange. It's not quite as vibrant as these other. You can see a little bit, but I feel like I'm gonna have to keep adding liquid. So I'm gonna use my knowledge of color, and I know that if I mix some red and some yellow, that's gonna help give me the orange that I want, since my red and my yellow seem to be a little bit stronger colors, which is also a great lesson. So if you were trying to make your own colors, you really don't have to necessarily make all of them. You really only need to make the primary colors. So that's red, yellow, and blue, and then you can make other colors with those colors. Yeah, so that is helping me get much closer to that kind of orange color that I want. And you can see they're not nearly as vibrant as if we had used commercial colors. They're not really gonna be, but that's okay. This is what we're going for. So I'm kind of happy with the general tones. They look about even. A couple of them I'm gonna mix a little bit better. I didn't want to keep mixing it until I was really kind of happy with all the tones, but I'm about happy with that. So I'm gonna finish mixing them and then we're gonna get them into the cake pans. All right, all of our batter is in their pans, nice and even, got everything all mixed together. So last little step is a little bit of a loud one. We're gonna slam it on the table. That's gonna do two things. It's gonna level out the top, but it's also gonna bring up any air bubbles so we don't get any kind of big pockets when we bake. So really loud. You see there, we had an air pocket come up. That's exactly what we want. Now this rainbow is ready to go into the oven, so we'll see how the oven affects the colors that we've baked. Okay, so I'm gonna make some simple syrup for my cake. So in this pot is 1 part sugar and 1 part water. We're just gonna bring this up to a boil. That's why they call it simple syrup, because that's all you gotta do. Very simple, and then we're gonna let it cool down. So this is a really common cake decorator trick. Typically cakes are not baked in ice and served this day you pick them up. So we're gonna soak our cakes in just a little bit of this simple syrup, and that's just gonna help them retain their moisture for a longer period of time, make them stay nice and moist so that we have a couple days to work with our cake. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this going. It's gonna come to a boil. I'll check and make sure all the sugar has dissolved, and then we'll cool it. So our syrup has come to a boil, so we're just gonna turn it off. I always like to double check and make sure all the sugar has dissolved, which it has. So I'm gonna turn it off, and we're just gonna let it cool. I'm gonna move it into some other container so it'll cool faster. It's all ready to go. How simple is that? It's like they call it simple syrup for a reason. Okay, so the cakes are out of the oven, and you can definitely see that they brown on top, which cakes always brown on top. So it's a little hard to see their color, so hopefully when we cut in, you'll still be able to see their color. But I did want to point out a couple interesting things. Number one is these cakes. So you see how they cracked, and these ones didn't? That's because of the space where they were in the oven. So these cakes were on the top, and these were on the bottom. So typically in your oven, well, it depends on the oven, but a lot of ovens, the top is pretty hot because heat rises, right? So what happened with these cakes, and you can also see that they're darker, is that the top set pretty quickly, way before the inside was done cooking. So when it set and then the inside kept cooking and kept rising, it had created splits, whereas in these, there are no splits. Another interesting thing is some of them have pulled away from the sides and some haven't. And you'll notice there's another pattern there too. So this is the green, the orange, and the red. These had the most water added when I added food coloring. So it's really common if there's a really high moisture, higher than normal moisture, water, milk, whatever, if you got measuring wrong or something like that, it's really common that your cakes will do that and they won't be quite as strong. If you get way too much, it'll actually create like this dip on the side. So we won't really know if we have that until we get them out of the pans. But anyway, just some interesting things I'm noticing between the different cakes. Since this is all the same batter, hypothetically they should look the same, but that's why you see the cracking on these and not these, and that's why you see the kind of shrinking in on those and not these. So we need to get these out of their pans. So remember, there's parchment on the bottom, so it's not gonna have stuck on the bottom. So we just need to run either, this is a baby offset spatula, you could also use a paring knife. So you're just gonna stick it in the side and push against the metal, not the cake. Because if you push against the cake, it'll kind of cut into the cake, and we don't want that. So go all the way around. And then I'm going to take a cake board And by the way, these have cooled completely. Most cakes you want to cool completely. And just like that guy will pop out. And let's see. Yeah, we didn't really get the dipping on the side, so that's good. And it wasn't a ton of extra liquid, but it certainly was, and so that's why we see a little bit of the shrinking down. And I'm probably gonna have a denser texture in this one than these. So it's just something to remember, especially with using these kind of handmade, homemade dyes. They're not as predictable, they're not as consistent as if we had bought commercial dyes. Okay, so it's time to cut these cakes, because if we kept them with this dome, they'd be very difficult to ice and keep nice and straight, so we always want to level our cakes before we try to ice them. I'm actually gonna turn this into 2 separate cakes, so for each color, I'm gonna split them in half so that I have 12 layers, which are gonna turn into 2 cakes. So what I want to do is I actually already picked what was my lowest, smallest cake, since I talked about earlier how the heights were a little bit different. So pick the lowest one, and I'm going to pick the lowest point on that cake to level it, and then I'm going to split it in half, and then I'm going to use the size of those layers to determine the size of all of my layers, because when you cut into that cake, you want it to look really nice and even on every single slice. So this is my shortest one, and I like to get down low and really see. And my lowest side is right here. So I'm gonna hold my knife and I'm gonna hold it steady. The only motion I'm gonna do is this. I'm not gonna really saw in half. I'm just gonna slowly work it in as I spin the cake around. All right, so I find my spot, and a lot of times I like to lock in my elbow, that's what that's called, my elbow. So that kind of helps me keep my knife steady, because I don't want it to move. If it moves, then it's not going to be nice and straight and even, and I really want to make sure that it's nice and even. So my elbow is locked in, and this hand stays as still as it can, and I just move the cake until I get all the way back to the center. And if I've done it right, which I have for this one so far, is I should get exactly to the line that I just had. So right now I've kind of cut just a thin layer around. So I'm gonna do it again, but pushing in the cake a little bit more. Again, trying to keep my hand locked in place as much as possible. So now I've kind of cut this much through, and soon you'll just feel it's gonna release. Just like that. And the moment of truth, is this cake green? I'm gonna peek first. Hey, it's green, yay! And you can tell, like I predicted with this a lot of added moisture, that it is a little bit denser than a regular cake, especially here in the center. You know, it is what it is. There could be worse things. That's what this is all about, is trying new things. So maybe when I did this again, maybe I would try to get a little bit more water out of that green food coloring after I've made it. If I had a cheesecloth, that would be really helpful, but I don't have that. So anyway, so now I'm gonna split it in half as best I can. So I like to get down on this level so I can really see. Very hard to see when you're standing straight up. So I like to get down on this level, find halfway, lock in my elbow just like before, and literally the same thing I did last time, keeping my hand as still as possible. So go around, and now I've made my first complete circle, so I'm gonna push in a little bit further. And some cakes are a little bit harder than others. Like if you had a really dense kind of pound cake, it could be a little bit harder as well, because the knife wants to move because it's dense on the inside. Sponge cakes and lighter cakes a little bit easier, but anyway, there are my 2 green layers, and I'm happy with that color. It's kind of like this cute lime green. They were never going to be really intense colors with these natural colors, but I think these little pastels will be cute. So I'm going to do the same thing with the rest of these layers, and hopefully the rest of my colors turn out really nice. I am very excited to see what they look like. Okay, so I've cut into all the cakes and I want to show you the results. So on this end, I'm very happy. On that end, not as much, but that's okay. So just as a reminder, this is the purple blueberries, which I think turned out really good. This is the blue from the red cabbage. Again, I'm actually pretty surprised how blue it turned out. Blue is a pretty hard color to achieve. This is the green from the spinach, which I'm really happy with. This is the yellow from the tumeric. This is the orange, and this is the red. So you can see here that that red didn't really come out, so we added red to the yellow, to the orange with some yellow, and it kind of just came more of like a deeper gold yellow than this one. And then this was supposed to be red, and you can even see on the top of what I cut off, it's kind of got that pink hue, but it didn't really remain at all in the cake, which is really interesting, especially because red velvet cake is originally colored with beets. But red velvet cake also includes cocoa powder, which helps give some really nice depth of color, and there's actually some kind of red hues in there as well. And I didn't want to add any cocoa powder just because I kind of wanted to see what I could get out of the pure color. So for the first time ever using natural colors, I think it's pretty successful. And I think with this kind of lineup, I'll get a really interesting ombre effect still when I cut in the cake. It won't be the same as the rainbow that I was planning on, but I think it'll still be pretty nice. Let's make some buttercream. So in my mixer, I have some butter and I have some powdered sugar, which I sifted. You don't usually have to sift powdered sugar for this type of recipe as long as it's really, really fine. But this powdered sugar was actually pretty old, so it started to clump up. Always important to kind of check out your ingredients if they're not in the perfect condition. You need to make decisions on what to do with that. So that's about half or so in here. And I'm gonna mix, this is softened butter, by the way, so it's been out at room temperature. Definitely important that this needs to be nice and soft for this recipe. So I'm gonna put it on a low speed, and I like to pulse a little bit so I don't get powdered sugar everywhere. And then I'm just gonna mix until it's combined. Okay, so it's been, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. It doesn't take very much time at all. So I'm gonna scrape my bowl because I want it to be nice and even. And this is, I really like this buttercream recipe for a lot of reasons. One, it's really simple to make. A lot of buttercreams, like Italian Swiss, are kind of complicated. They're delicious, but they are a little bit complicated. So this is really, really simple. And I also like it because it has both butter and shortening, which a lot of buttercreams don't have, like the Swiss and Italian. But American buttercream usually has both. And I like this recipe in particular because it's got a higher level of butter than shortening, so it's twice the butter to shortening. So shortening is a great addition to buttercream because it's white in color, which is really great when we're trying to decorate cakes. It starts off a little bit more of a pure white, so our colors just read a little bit better. But it's also great, and this is why I use it for a lot of wedding cakes that I do, because shortening melts at a higher temperature than butter does. So it just gives us a little bit more of a stable buttercream, especially because we live in Virginia and the weather can be crazy. Now this buttercream still won't stand up in crazy Virginia summer weather. So I wouldn't say make a wedding cake out of this and put it outside for 5 hours in July because it's just gonna melt and be sad. But in the springtime on a, you know, medium hot day, it's probably gonna be fine. So that's one reason I like this recipe. Whenever you do add shortening to a buttercream, you have to know that because the melting temperature is different, it gives you a different mouthfeel. So butter melts at a temperature that's lower than our internal body temperature. So when we eat butter, it melts and it creates this really kind of pleasing texture. When shortening goes in our mouth, it doesn't melt because it melts at a higher temperature than the inside of our bodies. So it kind of will leave like this greasy film. Now for this recipe, because there's such a high concentrate, or there's a high level of butter versus shortening, it's not as noticeable. You might find if you got like a grocery store cake, something like that, it's gonna have a lot higher level of shortening, and you're definitely gonna get that kind of like waxy coat feel in your mouth. So that's why I like this recipe. It's It's a really good balance, I would say, between the butter and the shortening, being that it's twice the butter to shortening. So you're still getting a lot of that really great butter flavor. The mouthfeel is still really good. So for me, it's a really great option. So just added my shortening in there. Also, room temperature is very important that all of these ingredients be at room temperature. And I'm gonna mix until I don't see any more lumps of shortening. And this is all still on a low speed. And once that's all combined, I'm gonna add the rest of my powdered sugar. So my shortening is all combined, so I'm gonna add the remainder of my powdered sugar, and then I'm gonna put this on, as soon as it's all mixed together, on a low speed, I'm gonna turn it up onto a high speed. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna make our buttercream a little bit whiter by incorporating air, which ironically we're gonna later have to knock out. We'll talk about that in a second. But most importantly, it's gonna kind of help dissolve the powdered sugar so you don't have this like granular feeling. So we're gonna start it on low, because if I put this on high, I would get powdered sugar everywhere. And we don't want that. Awesome, just like that, and then up on high, and it's gonna get a lot paler and a lot smoother. Don't forget to stop periodically and scrape your bowl. You can already see this has gotten a lot lighter and paler, which is awesome. So got my bowl all nice and scraped. So I'm gonna get it back on high. All right, so our buttercream is all done. So hopefully you can see that it's gotten really pale, though I'm looking at the camera and it looks like a little yellower in the camera than it does in person. But it is gonna be always, you know, not quite white because of that butter. You can make this buttercream with all shortening, but it's a pretty rough mouthfeel. So every once in a while you'll have a bride that says, I want it to be perfectly white. And typically all you have to do is explain that it's just gonna be off-white. You're not really gonna be able to tell the difference, and it's gonna taste terrible if you don't add butter. You know, 99 times out of 100, the bride's gonna understand and be fine with that. So this is done. Typically at this stage, what would happen is I would add some vanilla and a little bit of water to knock out my air bubbles and put it on a low speed. But I don't want to do that today because number one, I'm not going to add vanilla because I only have brown vanilla here. You can get clear vanilla, but I don't have any clear vanilla. And I already know that these natural food colorings have like kind of a brownish tinge anyway. So if I add some brown, it'll kind of read a little bit more brown than I want. So I'm not going to actually add vanilla today. And I'm not going to add water because these food colorings have kind of like a high concentration or like a lot of water versus like a gel color that I'm used to using. I don't want to add it yet because I think that I'll probably have to add a decent amount of water in these food colorings to get the color that I want. So to knock out the air bubbles I just created, which is ironic because like why would you create the air bubbles? So we had to create the air bubbles to kind of dissolve the powdered sugar. But we need to knock them out because if you have a lot of air bubbles in your buttercream, you're gonna have a lot of bubbles on your cake and it's not very pretty. So there's a couple ways you can do it. One is right now adding liquid on a low speed. It'll just like slowly knock the air bubbles out. The second way, unfortunately for us, is gonna be by hand. So if we keep any of this buttercream white, it's probably we're just gonna have to kind of beat it back and forth a little bit to knock out the air bubbles. Anything that we add a lot of food coloring to, once we mix that with the extra water, we're definitely gonna knock off the air bubbles, so that won't be a problem. So now this buttercream is ready. Let's start to assemble these cakes. All right, so let's get this cake assembled. So I've got all my cakes unwrapped from last night. And I'm gonna start with a cake board base. Usually you wanna use something that's bigger than your cake, so this will give me some room to work, but still have enough to pick up. This is just a cardboard cake round. Kind of depends on what kind of cake you're doing, what the finished board will be on. Usually you'd want something a little bit more decorative than this. There's some nice gold and silver ones, or you can get wooden ones, or like plastic ones for whatever your final presentation is going to be. But for here, for now, well, I don't have any like fancy disposable ones. And all of my really nice display cake bases are really big, so it would look really silly for this cake. So I'm just gonna do this cardboard today. So I'm gonna put my cardboard down, and then I'm gonna get a little bit of icing, not a lot, just a thin layer. So you can see that's really, really thin. And then I'm gonna take this one off. And I'm gonna use this board as well in case I need to move it. And I'm gonna make sure it's nice and centered on here. You don't have to have both boards. It's definitely not like imperative. I usually do 2 boards, especially like if you're gonna do a tiered cake, you need something to ice it on and then something to be able to move it. So you'd keep this one. Again, for today it's not necessary, but it kind of makes me feel better because that's the method I usually go. And then before we start adding any icing, we're gonna add our simple syrup that we made, and it's nice and cooled. So this was in the refrigerator overnight. So I know that it's plenty cool. If I try to use this hot and then put icing on it, obviously my icing would melt, so very important this is cool. So I'm just gonna take my pastry brush and brush a thin layer on. Some people will use a squeeze bottle to do this, and that's totally fine. I don't think I have squeeze bottles anywhere here. So I'm just gonna use my brush. And I do wanna pay closest attention to my edges, because that's where your cake is your driest, is on your edge, especially when you get into kind of bigger cakes, because our oven temperature, our oven bakes our cakes from the outside in, so the center is always the most moist and the outside is always the driest, so that's my most important area to get simple syrup on. So some people will simple syrup all their layers and then assemble. Some people will kind of simple syrup as they go. I'm a simple syrup as I go kind of person. I just think it stays a little bit cleaner. There's not really a right or wrong way to do it. But my simple syrup is all soaked in. So now I'm gonna add some buttercream, and I'm gonna actually take some of my buttercream out and put it in this bowl. And I like to do this just because right now the cake is completely exposed, so it's pretty easy to kind of get crumbs into your buttercream as you're working. And if there's crumbs in the center of your cake, it's not the end of the world. But I don't want to contaminate all of my icing. So if I put it in here and I put it on here and I get a little crumb, then I come back, it's not the end of the world because I'm just on the filling and crumb coat stage. If I put it in here, now I've contaminated my whole batch. It's very hard to get cake crumbs out once you've started to get them in. So I always, when I'm at this point, I like to just have a second bowl. And when I talked about knocking out air bubbles, like this is literally all I meant. You just take a spatula, and it could be a regular spatula, doesn't have to be an offset. You just kind of go back and forth. I'm not super worried about the air bubbles for this stage because this is not like the pretty stage. Just like that. And I'm gonna do kind of a thin layer. You know, it's all kind of depends on what you want. You don't want to get super, super thick ever with buttercream because as the weight of your cake kind of comes, it can kind of squooge out the sides, which means that your cake on the outside will kind of look like bumpily. But I'm gonna do thin because my cake layers are kind of thin, so I don't want like tons and tons of buttercream on mine. So just like that. So I've gotten my first layer and I have them all set up so I don't mess up my kind of ombre look. And again, it's not the rainbow look that I was going for, but I think the ombre look is still gonna be kind of cool and effective later. So anyway, I got it set up so I don't get confused. It's always nice to set yourself up for success. And just make sure you're set up in a way that's not gonna have you make any mistakes. So I put my next layer on, and I like to push down, and I often will come down and kind of see how flat it's looking. So I can kind of push down in the areas that are a little bit higher if I need to. And as I go, if I haven't cut every single layer perfectly flat, you know, we try our best, but you know, we all make mistakes. So like this one has a little bit of a low spot. So if my next cake has a little bit of a high spot, I'm gonna put that high spot here. So again, gonna simple syrup this guy. Paying attention to my sides for sure. You can fill your cakes with lots of things. It doesn't have to be buttercream. Something that I was able to sell to brides a lot was a very thin layer of jam and then buttercream, because it's a nice way to kind of make it feel a little bit more upscale. And yes, I charge more for that, which is always nice. But it looks really nice because usually, especially on a wedding cake, it's kind of like a white cake and then maybe like a bright red raspberry and then the white buttercream. It looks really, really pretty and elegant, and it adds a really nice punch of flavor. Brides are notorious for wanting their wedding to feel very custom, but also not feel custom. So typically, they don't want really weird things. They just want something a little bit special, because you don't want to, most brides are not trying to like make anybody uncomfortable, and you'd be surprised what people are uncomfortable by. So that's a nice way to kind of add a little bit of extra money to your cake. So when I was doing wedding cakes, if I added a jam layer, that would usually add 25 cents per serving cost, but it probably only cost me a couple dollars in supplies. So it's a really great way to add some money. Now it does certainly affect your labor, because that's more you have to do, but well worth it for the upcharge that you get to do. So got my second layer, and I'm literally gonna just keep going, adding my layers, and for both cakes, so simple syrup icing all the way up. Okay, so our cakes are all stacked in simple syrup, so they're ready for a crumb coat. Now, one thing I want to point out is that I've turned the bottom of this cake upside down. I like to do that whenever I can, just because there's not as much exposed crumb, and it's just going to be less likely to kind of tear. It's also going to be a flatter edge than I can do by hand. There are cake slicers that you can buy that'll help you give like this perfect even slice, but anyway, I usually like to do that. It's just a little bit simpler, but I do still simple syrup the top of this cake. Now I'm gonna crumb coat. Now, I don't always crumb coat my cakes. It kind of depends on what I'm doing. I typically will if it's gonna be done in a white icing or it's gonna be a wedding cake. I won't crumb coat if it's, basically I do a crumb coat if it's a very expensive cake. The more and more you ice cakes, the better you get, and the less likely you are to get crumbs into your buttercream. So it kind of depends. I'm gonna crumb coat today just to show you, but if I was doing this for a client, I probably wouldn't, because I've done this pretty many times. But I do want to show you this, and you know, you have to think about every decision you make in this industry, because every decision you make takes time, and time is money. So if I wasn't going to charge a lot for this cake, I shouldn't spend a lot of time on this cake. So one way I can save some time is to not crumb coat it. But we're going to crumb coat it today so I can show you what it looks like. So I'm going to get my offset spatula, and I'm going to load it up with icing. And typically you want to load it up the height of the cake, but that's a little hard with my bowl size, so I'm going to kind of do 2 sections at once. So the first time, and I still don't want to like encourage a lot of crumbs to fall out, and I've cleaned up most of the crumbs from my area just to help as well. So you're going to take your spatula in your hand with your pointer finger here, your thumb here, and you're going to go across your body. So I'm kind of doing it up here so you can see a little bit better, but I typically work right here. It's a really comfortable spot. But I'm going to work here so you can see. So with an angle, I'm just going to very gently spread a thin coat all the way around, just like that. And you can see that, you know, there's some icing that was kind of sticking out from when I filled the cake, so definitely use that icing as well. So I'm gonna do it again, right now, just because this is such a tall cake and I don't have a tall vessel for my buttercream. I'm only gonna do the bottom, but I typically will do both. And my cake is sliding. I haven't been able to make room in my refrigerator yet. I'm hoping to after this. If you refrigerate your cake, that icing that we put on the board will hold it in place. But this has not been refrigerated, so it's gonna slide a little bit, and that's okay. And the smaller your cake, the more likely, you know, it is to slide, just because it's lighter. Just push it back in. So I got a good, decent coat on the bottom half, so I'm gonna do the same for the top half. And you can see there's all kinds of crumbs in here now because I'm literally scraping against the cake, and that's okay. That's why I have this small bowl of icing, so I don't get crumbs in my larger batch of icing. So same thing. Again, I'll try to awkwardly do it towards the camera so you can see a little bit better. So just like that. And I always like to double check, make sure I don't have any gaps. And then I'll spread some on the top, so I'll put on the, so I was using this side of the spatula, now I'm gonna use this side just to put a thin coat on the top. And I'm always holding my spatula at some sort of angle. So when I say angle, see how that's kind of like at a 45-degree angle that way? So I don't mean an angle like this, I don't mean an angle like that, I mean an angle like that. And that's what's gonna help spread that icing. So just like that. And now you'll see I've kind of pushed icing off the edge. Whenever you see icing either building up like off the edge or up past the edge, it's called a burr, so I need to get that burr off. So I'm gonna kind of come back here on the sides and I'm gonna push it back up. It's always easier to take a burr off the top of the cake than it is the sides of the cake. A lot of people, when they see something like this, they wanna kind of scrape it off like this. You never want to have your spatula at any other plane than this or that. No weird angles because we want straight sides, straight top with a nice sharp corner. So we never want to hold our spatula like that because then we will lose that sharp corner. We'll have kind of a rounded corner. And it looks like my cake's trying to lean a little bit, and that's okay because I can fix it right now while it's still a little soft, no worries whatsoever. And this thin coat of buttercream, this crumb coat, is just gonna help protect my final layer of buttercream from getting crumbs in it. Again, it's not like you have to do it. Kind of just depends on your scenario. I always do it for a wedding cake though, because it's the most expensive cake you sell. And brides are very picky, as they should be. They're paying a lot of money. All right, so I'm back straight. So now I'm gonna cut what's called cutting my burrs off. So I'm gonna take my spatula and some people come this way, some people come that way. I always come across my body, but I'm gonna do it towards you so you can see what I'm doing. So basically I'm holding it at a 445 just past the cake, but the same height as the top. And I'm just gonna pull forward. Just like that, which is very hard for me to do when I can't see. So usually I do it towards my body, just like that. And if I pushed a little bit over, that's okay. Just like that. I really want to see cake throughout here, because if I put a really thick layer, my next icing layer is gonna be really thick as well. And then it's gonna be too much buttercream. You definitely wanna make sure you're getting a balance. So it really is just a very thin coat, just to seal off any crumbs. So I might actually take a little bit more off some of my sides. And the cool thing is actually there's pretty trendy, probably started like 5 or 6 years ago, is called the semi-naked cake. So there's naked cakes, which would be kind of like this. I would have done a neater job if I was doing it a naked cake, but it would look basically like this. And this is called like a semi-naked cake. So it's not quite naked. And it may seem a little silly, but it kind of came with like the rustic trend. And all you gotta do is put some flowers and some fruits, and it actually does look pretty elegant, so it's pretty cool. But now I'm gonna clean it up, my cake board. And I'm going to attempt to make room in my refrigerator for these, because the crumb coat really works best if you can get it to chill completely. Unless you're working with buttercream, that's a crusting type of buttercream, then you can do that at room temperature. But I don't usually use that unless I'm gonna do something that's like a carved buttercream cake. But that's for some other time. So I'm gonna try my best to get this in the refrigerator so that it can chill and seal in all those crumbs. Okay, so we're gonna color these icings. And I know the intent was to do that kind of rainbow look, but I really didn't get the red and orange that I really wanted. So I'm not gonna make red or orange buttercream because I think it's doesn't make much sense. So I think I'm gonna try and imitate what's on the inside. So we had a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue, green, and yellow. So I'm gonna use the colors that I made to color that. And I also wanted to show you that I have my powdered colors, especially for my green, since this one's pretty liquidy. I might end up using some of that. My purple I might not need because this blueberry is so thick, it might work out pretty well for me. The yellow, there's no need to make a powdered version because turmeric is already in a powder, so if I feel like I can't add any more liquid, I just add turmeric powder. And last, my cabbage, it's very hard to make a blue powder version, so I'm hoping that this one is gonna be powerful enough. But this is what I have the least of, so this is the one I'm gonna color first because I don't wanna make, you know, some of these really, really dark and then have them the rest be light. I'd like them to kind of be in the same color family, and I know that I have the least of the blue, which kind of overnight has turned into a little bit of a green, actually. So we'll see how that turns out. Maybe for this blue food coloring, it should be used right away. It's still got some blue to it, but it's definitely looking a little bit teal. So I'm just gonna add a little bit at first, because I can always add more, but it doesn't look like that's gonna go very far. I'm just gonna add it all. Yeah, this is interesting. So it's not really blue anymore. So yesterday it was pretty blue, but just kind of sitting overnight, it's definitely turned into kind of more of a green. And honestly, when it baked, it kind of got a little bit more green as well. So we'll see. It didn't really change the color very much, and that's all I had was that little bit left. So we'll see what we decide to go with. One of the fun things about being a cake decorator is rolling with the punches, so I may, you know, change my plan. I've already changed my plan several times, but at the end of the day, if my cake still looks good, nobody knows to change my plan. So I'm gonna start coloring all of these. It's kind of the same way, just adding and mixing until I'm happy with the color, and we'll go from there. All right, so I'm getting close to being happy. I think I want my green a little bit more vibrant, but I've already added a decent amount of my liquid color, so I'm gonna try adding some of my powdered color. With traditional powdered colors, it works really, really well, but I've never used these, so I'm just gonna add a little bit at a time to see how it goes. It's just okay. Doesn't really seem to be dissolving super well. Seems to just be more spotty. So maybe this would have been better to add to my cake versus this one. But that's okay. I'm still getting green, so maybe I'll just leave it like that. Happy with the other ones except for my blue. Adding a small amount of blue or a small amount of purple actually to white buttercream, like a teeny amount, actually makes it look more white, which is this really cool optical illusion. So I feel like that's what happened. I added a small amount of blue, and it's kind of like it got to the sharp white and then just a hint of blue with it. So I'm not like really feeling it. So I have decided to make more blue food coloring. So that's what's going on back behind me. I've already steeped my cabbage, and now I'm reducing down that steeping liquid, and once it's reduced, I'll add that baking soda. Very important though that I let it cool, because if I try to add it hot in here, it's just going to melt my buttercream, and that would be really sad. So I'm gonna wait until that's done, and then I will make sure I like all my colors together. So I made a little bit more of that blue food coloring, and I noticed, and I've already started to change it a little bit, that since these are all made, you know, from natural products, they kind of have these little like particles in them, which I actually think is a pretty neat look. But the blue one didn't, because it was just a liquid. So I actually took some of my blueberry powder that I made and I mixed it in. So it just kind of has a little bit more of the consistent look, since they all kind of have those little particles going. I didn't want like one section to not look like that. I think that's a little bit odd. So I think I'm happy with these colors. I can't really go any darker with the blue without it getting too soupy to work with. So I'm gonna stop these right where they're at. So now we can decorate this cake. So it is time to ice this cake, and what I'm kind of aim for is having a couple of different colors going up, kind of representing the rainbow that I had inside. And if you recall, my red and orange layer didn't turn out super red and orange, so I'm not gonna make red and orange icing, so I'm just gonna do the colors that show up. So just it kind of makes a little bit more cohesive design once it's all cut into. So I have my colors already in piping bags right here. So I'm gonna start with my darkest color. Usually you want to have your darkest colors lower, or your heaviest design lower. It's just a little bit like more pleasing to the eye. It makes your design look a little bit nicer. So I'm gonna start here, and I'm gonna use my turntable, and I'm just gonna pipe my icing about a quarter of the way up the cake. Maybe one more. Then I'll do the same thing for the blue. And then green. And you can see this doesn't look perfect yet. Don't worry, we're gonna smooth out these sides. But I'm trying to make sure I don't really have too many kind of gaps as I go. Maybe a little bit more. And for this cake, I'm not paying a super close attention to how straight the lines are, because I kind of want it to feel a little natural. I'm not going to be worried about that. I'll do the last with my yellow all the way. And you want it to kind of go just a little bit taller than the cake. It's going to make it much easier to make those nice corners. And then I'm going to add yellow to the top. A little bit more yellow here. So there's a lot of people that start on the sides, a lot of people start on the top. Doesn't really matter to me. I kind of do it both ways. So I'm going to do the top first. So I'm going to spread out that buttercream I have nice and even on the top, just to get it spread out so there's no naked cake going on anymore. And I like to clean off my spatula pretty often. Just makes the job a lot neater, so it's nice to have a bowl or something nearby. And right now I have a bowl with separate colors, so I can keep my colors separate in case I need more later. So to make my top nice and flat now, I'm gonna take my spatula, I'm gonna put my pointer finger on the bend, and I'm gonna hold it at a 45-degree angle. When I talk about angle, I don't mean this kind of angle or this kind of angle. I mean that kind of angle. So that's what I'm seeing. It's hard for me to do it this way because I can't see what's happening underneath there. So I'm gonna hold it at an angle, and I'm gonna anchor the center into the center of the cake. And then I'm gonna hold it steady, and I'm just gonna very gently let it rest on top of the cake. And I'm gonna spin at the same time, and it's just gonna magically flatten for me, just like that. Magic. It's not magic. It's magically delicious. All right, so I'm happy with that. So now it's time to look at my sides. So I need to make those straight. So I'm gonna use a bench scraper. It's important that your bench scraper is taller than your cake, and this one is just barely, because this is a pretty tall cake. So again, angles are really important. Very important that it's straight up and down, so not like that or like that, because then your sides won't be straight. And a lot of times I'll kind of like get down here so I can see. And then the angle up against the cake makes a pretty big difference as well. So what I'm seeing looks kind of like this. So kind of making a little triangle in here. And I'm gonna hold this steady. I'm not gonna move this. I'm gonna use my arm to move the cake. That's why we have our turntable. So I'm gonna kind of mime it at first before I do it. So our bench scraper goes into place, and then I'm gonna take my arm over the cake and turn it all the way around, and then I'm gonna push it underneath. So that way I've gone in one giant swoop. Because if I did like a little bit and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, I'd get a bunch of lines. And I don't want that. I want it to be one big swoop. So I'll have one line at the end, but that's always the back of the cake. And then when I finish the end, I just want to pull off gently so I can kind of minimize that line. And nobody gets this like perfectly smooth the first time. This takes a couple of rounds of rotating your turntable. So if you do this once and it's not perfect, do not panic, that's okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my first one done. So I'm just gonna rest it just against the buttercream. I'm gonna pull, make sure I go all the way under. So you can see it's already straightened up a lot, but it's also pointed out some places where maybe I didn't have quite enough buttercream. All right, so now I'm gonna go back in where I kind of see some gaps, and I'm just gonna fill them in so that my next swoop should probably be nice, a little bit better. So anywhere I see a little hole for each color. All right, so I filled in all my holes and I've cleaned off my bench scraper. If this was all one color, I wouldn't have to clean off my bench scraper in between, but just to make sure I don't muddy my colors too much, I went ahead and cleaned it off. So I'm gonna do it again, go all the way over. I'm gonna do all the way through. And if I look, I have pretty good coverage. So you might be able to see, I do have a little bit of seam. This is where I stopped at the end. So when I stopped, I tried to gently pull it off as opposed to stopping then pulling straight off. If I pulled straight off, I would have gotten like a really big tail, which I don't want. So I'm pretty happy with that. So the last little thing is to cut off. Hopefully you can see there's a little bit of buttercream kind of sticking up at the side, at the top. That's called a burr. So I'm gonna go back to my offset spatula, and I'm gonna talk about angles again. So again, not like that or like that, like this or like that. So everybody kind of cuts the burrs a little bit differently. Some people cut away from them. I cut towards me. I mean, it works for you, great, but for me, I can't really see that, so I like to cut towards me. So the action though is you take that 45 and you just bring it across the top of the cake. So I'm gonna get that 45-degree angle, and then just gently pull it towards myself. And then I just turn the cake, and I want to clean it off in between because any extra buttercream I have can leave kind of lines. So a lot of people, when they see these edges, they kind of want to do something like this. Whenever you're decorating cake, there's only two planes you're spatula should ever be on this plane or that plane. Never any kind of angles like this. Angles like this will mean you'll have really rounded sides, which you don't want unless you're doing some kind of really intricate carved cake. But that's not what we're doing. We want some nice straight corners. All right, just like that, we have our cake decorated. So I'm gonna clean off this board and I'm gonna get it in the refrigerator to chill so that it's ready for my drip. So the easiest way to clean off your cake board is to use your bench scraper and just right up against the line, you can scrape off your buttercream. And if you have a little bit left, you just go back around. Just be careful not to hit your cake. All right, so we're gonna make our chocolate drip, and it's a ganache, and ganache is a mixture of chocolate and heavy cream. So in this pot, I'm bringing my heavy cream up to a boil, and then I'm gonna pour it over my chocolate, and then I'm just gonna let it sit for a little bit to help melt that white chocolate. All right, so it looks like we're ready to go. Just about. All right, now we're ready to go. So I'm just gonna pour it on nice and even. And the heat from that cream is gonna melt our chocolate. So we actually just wanna let it sit. We don't wanna stir it yet. I kinda usually like to give it a little push so most of the chocolate is submerged. So I'm just gonna let it sit for a minute or two, and then I can start to stir it together. Okay, a couple minutes has passed, and I'm gonna very gently stir this together because I don't wanna add a ton of air into this, because then we'll have a lot of air. We want it to be nice and smooth. We don't want air bubbles in our drips. We want it to look perfect. So really slowly, I'm gonna incorporate all this together. And then we're gonna have to let it sit a little bit as soon as it's all incorporated, because if we add it right now to our cake, it's pretty hot and it'll melt the buttercream, and that'll kind of mess up our pretty sides. It also will not stop dripping. The drip will continue down the side all the way to the board, which isn't pretty. We want those kind of drips suspended on the sides of the cake. So we don't want that either. If you wanted a pure white drip for your cake, at this point you could add some white food coloring. I don't have white food coloring at home. And I think that's okay, because this whole thing is about natural food colors. So I don't want to add any unnatural colors today. So I'm just gonna keep going until all this chocolate is melted. Again, doing my best to be nice and gentle and not incorporate any air. You definitely don't want to use a whisk for sure, because that'll definitely incorporate a lot of air. So I'm just gonna keep going. The heat is gonna melt the rest of this chocolate shortly. So I decided to color this because I have all these colorings that I made. So I'm gonna add some of my purple, because I think that's gonna be really pretty contrast, because the purple's at the bottom of our cake and this is at the top. So I think that's gonna be really pretty. We'll see, but I think that's gonna be a nice look. So definitely looks like the white chocolate took the purple a little bit stronger than the cake or the buttercream did. So that's kind of interesting. I still think it'll be pretty. So get all that color in. Then we're gonna let it cool till it's kind of close to room temperature, like maybe 80 degrees or so. Much hotter than that, again, will melt our buttercream. So got everything all incorporated. So I'm just gonna let it sit here at room temperature. Come check on it every once in a while until it's ready to go, and I'm leaving my cake in the fridge until that time. Okay, so our drip has cool down. So we always want to do a test just to make sure we're happy with it. So I'm just going to let it go. So our test looks good. So that means we can go ahead and do our drip. So we're just going to, every once in a while, let a little bit go over the edge. And you kind of want to make it, you know, random. You don't want every single drip to be the same. So each drip you want it to either be a little tiny one or a great big one. As you go, and then you can see it'll kind of continue to fall. So working quickly, we can also fill up the top as well. All right, so we got it all filled up. So I'm just gonna take my offset spatula and just spread it out very, very quickly while it's still warm, not cool. And I can make it nice and flat, or I can take my spatula and put it out up like that and then do a spiral by slowly moving it in. I can create a little extra texture on the top if I want. So while my ganache or my drip is chilling, I'm gonna get my piping bag ready for my final touches. So I have 3 colors left. I use pretty much all of the yellow. So I have these last 3 colors left, and I'm gonna put them all together in my piping bag to create kind of a swirl. Get all those tips in there and try to get them as even as possible. This would be much better if I had a larger piping bag, but I'm just gonna make this work because this is what I have. So I can put them all in like that. Try to shake them down as low as I can. And then if I squeeze, I should start to get a swirl where you can see I see some blue, some green, and some purple. Again, you get a much more even. If you had a bigger piping bag, there'd be more room, but it's pretty good. So as soon as that ganache is cooled, I will pipe some rosettes. All right, so the chocolate ganache is cooled a little bit, so it's nice and firm, so it's gonna be easy to pipe on. But before that, I kind of want to talk about how different these colors are. So really important for us to remember that colors do different things in different mediums, and this is really apparent. So I know these weren't conventional colors, but you can see they acted incredibly differently. So this was the blueberry puree, and so is this. So look how drastically different. So this is definitely like a blue purple, and this is a pink purple. You would never think that that was the same color, but the buttercream took the color differently than the ganache, and when we go to cut in this cake, you'll see that that layer looks in a different color as well. So just something to keep in mind, especially as we're trying to match colors, that not everything goes quite as easily as we might like it to. The conventional colors do typically go a little bit more evenly. But anyway, I've got my piping bag all set up with my 3 colors, so I'm gonna pipe some kind of rosettes on here. So I'm gonna start piping my rosettes. I've already got one, so I'm gonna go to the exact opposite side. Do another one, then go in between. Try to get it nice and even. Whenever you have kind of a swirl piping bag like this, it's a good idea to try to not put it down. So that way your colors are still all facing the same direction as when you started. It'll look a little bit more consistent in your finished product. All done.